The patient sat on a chair, clutching a small porcelain figurine of an angel. His fingers trembled as if he was afraid to let it go. He began speaking, avoiding eye contact with his listener. It was last Christmas. I wanted to find a gift for my niece. At the market, I found this figurine. It was so cute, a tiny angel with golden wings holding a candle. The vendor said it was an antique and that it would bring joy to any home. He glanced at the figurine and his face darkened. On the first night, when I placed it on the mantelpiece, I heard a faint tinkling sound, like someone walking on glass. I thought I was imagining things, but when I got up to check, the room smelled of wax and something burnt. His voice quivered and he gripped the figurine tighter. The next day, I noticed the candle in the angel's hands had grown slightly shorter, as if it had been burned. I thought it was just a crack due to its age, but that night, he swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to appear. I heard whispering, barely audible, but it was coming from the room where the figurine stood. When I went in, I saw a shadow on the wall. It moved, though there was no light in the room. The shadow resembled a child. It pointed at me with its finger, and then it vanished. His breathing grew heavy, and he lowered his gaze. Each day the candle got smaller and the shadows grew larger. One night I heard laughter, a child's laughter, but it sounded as though it came from deep underground. The next morning I found one of the ornaments on the Christmas tree broken, and the shards were arranged in a strange pattern. He held up the figurine and looked at it with disgust. That night, it came alive. I swear. The angel moved. Its head turned toward me, and a black liquid poured from its eyes. I tried to throw it away, but I couldn't. It always came back, as if it knew the way home. He threw the figurine onto the table and recoiled, as if it might attack him. Last year, the candle burned all the way down, and the lights in the house went out. In the darkness, I could see only shadows. They moved, they laughed, they called to me. And that's when I realized the gift wasn't meant for my niece. It was meant for me. The patient fell silent, wringing his hands, his gaze fixed on the figurine. It lay on the table, but in the lamplight, its lips seemed to curve into a faint smile. The patient sat in the corner of the room, wrapped in a blanket, as if it could protect him from the terror he had experienced. His hands trembled, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. It was a dream, but it felt too real. I found myself in a Christmas village. Everything was so beautiful. Garlands, snow sparkling like diamonds, and music playing in the distance. But there were no people. Only snowmen, hundreds of them. They stood along the streets, staring at me with their coal-black eyes. He took a deep breath as if trying to calm himself, but continued speaking, his voice tinged with fear. I heard the sound of bells. It grew louder and louder, and suddenly all the snowmen turned their heads toward me. They had no faces, but I knew they were watching. One of them took a step, then another. He covered his face with his hands as if trying to erase the images. I ran as fast as I could, but the village streets became closed off. I bumped into walls of houses that hadn't been there before, and the snowmen kept getting closer. Their coal eyes glowed brighter, red, like embers in a fire. His voice faltered, but he forced himself to go on. I saw a house. A wreath hung on the door and warm light spilled from the window. I opened the door and ran inside. It was a cozy Christmas home, a tree, presents, a fireplace, but no one was there. Only a small music box playing a tune. Silent night. He clenched his hands into fists, as if trying to hold on to reality. I walked up to the music box and saw that inside it were figurines of snowmen. They were moving. One of them lifted its head, and I realized it was looking directly at me. At that moment, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw them. The snowmen. They were already inside the house. He fell silent, struggling to hold back tears. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard a voice, deep and cold. It said, "You will be part of the celebration too." I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by silence. And then one of them reached out. Its snowy fingers were colder than ice. The patient hugged himself, shivering. I woke up, but the room was freezing, and there were footprints on the floor, leading to my bed. The patient sat in a chair, holding a cup of cold tea in his hands. His gaze was fixed somewhere outside the window where snow was falling slowly. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet and distant. It started with the Christmas choir. They were singing outside my window as I was going to bed. I didn't see them, but their voices were unusual, low, deep, as if each note resonated straight into my bones. He paused, his hand trembling and spilling a bit of tea onto the floor. In my dream, I was in a dark hall lit only by burning candles. Pine branches hung on the walls, adorned with golden bells that emitted a barely audible chime. And in the center of the hall stood a giant Christmas tree, its branches stretching almost to the ceiling. His gaze grew tense as if he were reliving the scene. The choir sang, but now I could see them. They were people, or what used to be people. Their faces were pale, lifeless, with hollow eyes. They stood in a semicircle, singing. Their lips moved, but there was no breath. When I took a step toward them, one of them looked at me. Its gaze was empty, but I understood it was calling to me. He closed his eyes as though trying to escape the memory, but continued. Something pushed me forward. I approached the tree and saw that its ornaments were faces, human faces. They moved, screaming silently, their eyes following me. The choir sang louder, and I felt the shadows cast by the candles beginning to move. They coiled around me like snakes, pulling me toward the tree. His voice rose, almost a shout. They told me, "You will be part of the song." I screamed, but my voice merged with the choir. I felt the shadows seeping into me, felt my voice becoming theirs. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen, as if I had become part of the hall. He clutched his head in his hands, his breathing heavy. I woke up, but the song continued. It echoed outside my window, slowly fading. In the morning, I looked at the tree in my house. Among the ornaments, I saw a face. My face.